and I get about 400 feet off the ground, and the next thing I know, I'm taking fire. So, I was ready if I took fire. So I dove for the ground, broke to the right. That way I'd get away from where that guy was shooting from the east. And I would get down close to the ground where I was out of the field of vision. You think if you're in a tube and a helicopter goes over, you can't see him but just a second if he's real low. If he's up high, you got a longer time, to take aim at him. So that was the idea. And what I didn't know is he wasn't firing at me from the east. When I looked at the bullet hole in the aircraft where he hit me, that bullet came straight in the nose, right above the chin bubble. And how it missed my left knee, I don't know. So I was diving right straight at him is what that amounts to. So he had changed position, or there was another sniper, and it was somewhere. He probably fired a good clip at me before he hit me. And what happened was we had Lamson 719, and that was an offensive that took place along Route 9 in Laos. And everybody was based out of Quang Tri and worked and operated out of Khe Sanh, or the Special Forces camp near there. And they were taking South Vietnamese troops in to invade Laos to attack the NVA on the Ho Chi Minh Trail along Route 9. And just like everything else that happened in Vietnam, they knew about it probably before we ever even conceived that we were going. The NVA and the VEC knew everything we were doing. We were completely infiltrated. They knew everything we were going to do. So we started taking those forces in and dropping them off on hilltops, and helicopters started getting shot down. It was a whole different ball game. The Air Force, I read a document that the Air Force gave the Army, and the Air Force had tried to warn the Army what they were going to encounter when they got into Laos, because pretty much all the 37 millimeter anti-aircraft fire and things like that had been, we had pushed them out into the mountains. And if they didn't come out, we didn't go in, kind of that sort of thing, We'd bomb them to death with B-52s. But here we were after them. And we did make a major difference, because it delayed them invading the South by several years. This was 1971. They didn't finally invade until 1975, 76, somewhere in that neighborhood. So they were traveling along Route 9, and what Reg's mission was, they were extracting all the South Vietnamese troops. It had been as much of a disaster as it had been a success. It wasn't much. The air, you couldn't see where you were going. There was so much smoke and haze. And the enemy had come up with a new tactic where these fire bases that we created, they had wire all the way around them, and we could defend the outside zones with mortars and machine guns and that sort of things. But we would kill them if they were out away from us. We would kill them with B-52s. We would kill them with jets. We would kill them with helicopter gunships. But they had 37 millimeter anti-aircraft and 57 millimeter anti-aircraft, surface to air missiles, and all of these things protected with 50 cal machine guns, 51 cal. And they shot so many helicopters down. It was crazy. And on one of the last missions, they were trying to parachute drop supplies to these guys that were trapped, with the NVA hugging the fire bases where they wouldn't get bombed. They'd hug the fire bases, and then we'd come into land. They'd shoot everybody down. They'd jump up all at one time. So it was a disaster. They told everybody to turn around and go back to base. They weren't going to be able to supply them because the winds were too high, and it was blowing the supplies off into the enemy hands. And as they were turning around, they actually got too far out than they were supposed to be. They got out of the area they'd been bombed by the Air Force. and they went they went apparently near a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft or something like that. Reg had a load of mortar shells on board. They were on pallets. He had pallets of them, and they were going to kick those out, but they still had him on board. And he got hit, they think, by 37 Mike as the flight was making a turn. And from 5,000 feet, he was at 5,000 feet, they got hit. And he went down in flames. And there's a lot of controversy over all of that. But net, Reg Cleve and his crew all were listed as missing in action. And no one was allowed to go rescue them because they were using people that had been shot down as bait to shoot more aircraft down.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and as I understand it, he actually took a second mission that day, because you told me somebody had chickened out.
Yeah, looking back on that, I kind of, it's exactly what you said, but looking back on it, I understand it a little bit differently. I talked to the platoon leader, and what he told me was, I got a lot of detail from him, and he said that Reg, the guy said he was not going to go. He refused to go. And so they were looking as to what to do. And I was waiting for him to tell me to go, but I didn't know it. But they had pretty much decided I shouldn't go. I was still basically recovering. And so Reg went to he went to the platoon leader and he said, look here. He said, this guy should not be flying there. It's too crazy. It's too many people dying. There's too many things going wrong. He doesn't need to be there if he doesn't want to be there. I'm going to go in his place. And Reg had already been there one time, and we had it all worked out where nobody would have to go twice. Well, now he's going twice. And he did, and he got shot. He told me, I was working in operations that night. He called me on the radio. He said, I got a bad radio. And so I let him know we're going to bring him a new radio out. He left, and the whole flight left him and went on, and he's going to catch up with them later. And so he said, I want you to come out here to the aircraft. It was a pretty good height where he was. So we got on one of those little mules, and rode out there to the aircraft with the radio man. And while he was putting the radio in, I stood out front of the helicopter with the rotor blades turning at flight idle. And I remember just standing there talking to him. We could hard to hear. And he says, I've had a premonition, and I know I'm not coming back.
Wow.
And I still have a hard time with this. Sorry. And I said, man, you're crazy. You're coming back. Don't say stuff like that. He says, no, I've had this premonition, and I know I'm not coming back. And if I'm listed as missing in action and I'm dead, you got to tell my wife the truth. And so I said, okay, okay. But I knew he was coming back. I wasn't worried about it. And then he went up there, and then I found this letter, and he had written all that in there and how to contact his wife. He had written me this letter with all that stuff in it. He left me his, I got to keep talking. It's hard.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Liston. I'm an Army vet, and I am at the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. Today is January the 24th of 2025, and I have the honor of interviewing Chief Warrant Officer 2, Carl Zipperer, from Mills River near Asheville, North Carolina. And welcome, Carl. It's great to see you. We have a history. We know each other from the Veterans Administration Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. Historically, Carl was a patient of mine and someone that I very much enjoyed treating. So hello, Carl, and welcome. And I want to welcome you home from Vietnam.
Well, thank you very much. And Yes, it's great to see you again. And are you still sticking people? Is that what you're still pricking people?
Something like
I
that.
I can't thank you enough for for having met you, and we've been friends ever since. No question about that. And it's just delightful, and
Thank you.
to be doing this with you.
Well, thank you. So we're going to start by asking you about your formative years. And I want to ask you first where you were born and raised.
Okay. I was born about 30 miles. Well, I was born actually in a hospital in Savannah, Georgia, but my home was about 30 miles north of Savannah, and it was a very rural county. My father owned about, I think it was 97 acres in the county, and we we raised cattle. At one time, we had pigs, and we had chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, etc., rabbits. If I caught one and we raised it, and then we would eat it, unfortunately. But uh, yeah, we I learned to garden. Um, I started working in the garden. I can't remember when I did. I was pretty small,
Uh-huh.
and I really learned a lot, which I appreciate much more today than I did then. It was nice just to be able to have a little property myself, and I learned all that then. But yeah, I grew up out in a very rural area. Uh, it was about 3 miles out of town, a little small town. 3 miles out of town, 2 miles up a dirt road, and it wasn't but about a half a dozen other people lived on that road. That road was probably 3 to 4 miles long, and there was nothing around us but pine trees, mostly swamps, creeks. Lived 9 miles from the Savannah River and 9 miles from the Geechee River to the west. So there was lots of creeks, and we were only 50 miles from the coast. So I learned to fish in freshwater and saltwater. I learned to crab and shrimp. We did that at the beach. We did all that at the beach. Or we'd go out in boats or off a dock somewhere. If it was an opportunity, we took it. My dad was a very good fisherman, taught me to fish. He taught me how to handle a rifle and a shotgun, and he taught me a lot about gun safety. And then he kind of turned me loose, and I was probably 14 when he turned me loose with a 22.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Maybe a little bit earlier than that, but I had a pellet gun probably by the time I was 12, I guess, and it was a gas powered pellet gun. So I was used to handling firearms, and then I got into archery, and I belonged to a bow hunting club, and got to go on some nice hunts. Uh, I camped out a lot. I would go out in the woods and stay gone overnight for 2 nights and not take anything to eat. Everything I had, I got it in my camp. Uh, Palmetto heart, fish, uh, things like that.
So you
So,
were foraging at an early age.
yeah, we did. We picked wild huckleberries. We picked blackberries, wild blackberries. They grew up and down the roads, along the fence rows. Um, we foraged other things like that. We didn't forage any mushrooms, and I was always curious about that, but I didn't have anyone to teach me that. But yeah, I've always felt like I learned to be pretty self sufficient. I could follow animal tracks. I'm not an expert tracker by any means, but I can follow sign to some extent. Um, I learned all that, and I really wasn't even interested in girls, I guess, until I got to high school. High school started at our age, at our county, at the 9th grade. So 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And so uh, then when I got a driver's license, the only thing I did was, I'd go bow hunting somewhere or something like that, camp out in a uh, in a tent or a hammock. Jungle hammock was usually what I used. But I got interested in girls, and that went all that direction. And I started making a lot lower grades in school. I didn't usually have to study to make good grades, but it got a little tougher in high school. But I still got by pretty easily. Um, I was in the glee club. I was in the band like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and then 9th grade, and then they asked me to sing with a quartet on real short notice and go to regional meet, and we won first place. So I was invited to join the glee club, which I did that for 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. And the other thing I'd say about growing up, I had great parents. I didn't understand that until I spent basic training and part of flight school in the Army. And I went back and apologized to them for being a little teenage jackass, you know, and
Yeah.
told them how much I appreciated them, that I had learned differently what great parents they were. And it's the truth. I was raised in a redneck area. I think I knew one other guy that, well, anyhow, I wasn't raised to be like all the people in the area where I was raised. And so I left that area pretty quickly. Yeah, I got out of there. I went to well, I want to go back and say one thing I did notice while I was there was that we had Savannah had an Air Force base in it when I was younger, and then it became an Army base. Uh, but it had the Air Force base, and there was the Marines at Beaufort, and there were Marines further down the coast, out off the North Carolina coast, Beaufort, South Carolina, not Beaufort. And I don't know, it's just a lot of air traffic all the time. There used to be big blimps going by and stuff like that. And I used to love to watch that. And I noticed I was always outside hunting, birds or gardening. And there's a lot of helicopters going over all the time, helicopters, helicopters. And what I didn't know was they were training helicopter pilots, right there out at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah. And they were training these guys to go to Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
And there was when you could go to flight school at Fort Walters. Everybody went through Fort Walters for primary, but then you could go to Hunter or you could go to Rucker, which both Rucker's been renamed. But anyhow, you could go one of those two. But
Well, tell me, did you grow up with a lot of religious things in your life? Did you go to church
wow,
when you were younger?
yeah, it sure did. You don't. I have never known a more religious man than my father. And my mother was about that far behind him. Uh, they both were, and they both came up that way. Uh, and yeah, I was raised. We went to church every Sunday. We didn't miss, and then we went to choir practice on Wednesday, and we had all these other events that we would go to. So yeah, it was beat into me.
Okay. Now, what church was it?
Um, it was the Lutheran church
Was
in the
it?
little small town where I was raised.
Uh-huh. Missouri Synod or LCA or
Um, LCA.
okay.
Hmm.
So that was
Are
pretty
you Lutheran?
even that I was actually.
Uh-huh. To ask that question, I figured you must either be
Yeah.
that or have something to do with religion.
Yeah. So Were there other areas of interest in school besides the band and the glee club?
Was there any other areas of interest? Yeah, I belonged to the science club.
Okay. And who were your friends in high school? And
I'm sorry, say that again.
who were your friends when you were growing up? Did you have anybody you
Um,
really
I
liked to?
had a couple of friends that I went through grammar school with, uh, and I kind of got into a different group of friends in high school. It was same friends, but some of the friends went off with like FFA and and those kinds of things. And of course, I went in football or basketball, and I went into areas of band, glee club, science club, things like that, um, and 4-H. I wasn't a 4 FFA member, but I was a 4-H'er. And so I kind of ended up with a different group of friends, and a much smaller group, though. I had met some people through the church and things like that, um, where there were where all the Lutheran churches would get together, and I knew some people who didn't live, who didn't go to grammar school with me, but I knew them all through grammar school because of that, and I was friends with some of those. But I made a lot of new friends. Um, but and I hate to say this in recording, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it anyhow. Out of all the people that I went to school with, I'll tell you how many really good friends I have. I have one. He lives in right near Valdosta, Georgia. He's a retired newspaper man, and he's one of the greatest guys I've ever known. We're still friends. I'm I'm friends with him because he and I didn't necessarily have all the same beliefs that so many other people did in that area.
Anything else that you want to add about your years growing up?
I would say that I started working at a little local grocery store when I was 15. There weren't any laws back then that said you couldn't run a slicer or a bandsaw until you were 18, and I've got a scar to prove it on my thumb from a bandsaw. But yeah, I learned to cut meat. I was just in the grocery store one evening with my mother. It was one of the three little local grocery stores in town, and I knew the guy working behind the counter because he was the owner's son, and he was the same age as my sister. And so I was in the ninth grade when he was in the 12th. And so it was along about that time, I mean, about 10th grade, that he leaned over the counter when I was in there one evening and asked me if I wanted to work there. So I said, sure, I would. So he got permission from my mother, and I started there as a meat cutter. And I worked there after school or on weekends, or Saturday. No, nobody was open on Sunday. And during the summer, I also worked there quite a bit, and so I was able to save up some money to go to college.
That's great. So
So
tell me, did you have brothers and sisters other than the one sister you mentioned?
sort of, yeah. I have a brother who's 12 years older than me, and he lives in Nashville, or he lives in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Um, and he and I are pretty close. Um, then I have two sisters, and both of them are older than me, and one of them, I never really, I mean, she was gone. Like my brother. My brother went to school. He went to college when I went to first grade, and then my sister was still going to school while I was in the third grade, and then the younger girl, my next youngest older sister, she and I went to school together for 9 years. So yeah, that's my brothers and sisters.
So you were almost raised separately because you were younger than
Yeah,
everybody else.
absolutely. And I was the baby, as so they said, and I was given
Yeah.
special treatment
Yeah.
and all that bullshit.
Well, that sometimes works to your advantage, doesn't it?
Hey, if it was an advantage, I couldn't help it. It wasn't anything that I did. And where I saw they got advantages, I didn't hold that against them. I was happy, that they could be in different situations. But my parents were, well, there was two less kids to take care of, and in particular once I got to working, which I actually started working for the library, putting up books, mopping floors, and cutting the grass for the library in Springfield. Um, and I made 75 cents an hour for doing that. So I was making money, plus I was cutting my neighbor's grass. And, you know, I always had money. Never had a lot, but I always had money.
And you said you were saving money for your own college
Yeah, I
expense.
saved up money for college.
Uh-huh.
And I left the grocery store I was working for during the summer before I went to college, and I went to Savannah and I worked at one of the chain stores. I got on as a meat cutter there. And so uh, that gave me a lot more hours and more money.
So now, did you progress to the level of
So,
butcher
well,
when you were?
I was well, I think back then I was classified as an apprentice. Okay. And so then I went to college at the University of Georgia, and I went for 1 quarter. And when I got to register for the second quarter, they made me register now. They made us register in alphabetical order, and so you know, just like in the military, I didn't learn that until later, But yeah, and so by the time I got ready to sign up for the courses that I wanted, none of them were available, and I didn't want to take basket weaving, though I would today if my hands would handle it. I'd love to know how to make baskets, but I didn't want to take basket weaving and the other things that were available to me, and I wanted to take good credit courses, and they weren't available. So I said, well, I'm going to be broke anyhow, so I'll drop out a quarter and work. And so I then went back to the grocery chain that I was working for and had been working for before, and I worked for them. And then for the next quarter, I enrolled at Georgia Southern College in Statesboro, Georgia, and that was only about a 45-minute drive away, whereas Georgia Southern was, the University of Georgia was up north of Atlanta, so it was a several-hour drive. I went to Georgia Southern, and I hadn't been there very long, and the draft board reclassified me from a 2S student deferment to 1A, ready to go. And I don't remember what my lottery number was. Um, there wasn't a lot of people to draw from in my county, and I knew I did not want to get drafted. I was struggling in school. I had a real hard time staying focused. I hadn't learned to study like I should have learned, and so it was difficult for me. So, say again.
Did you have a major that you had declared when you went to college?
I was just in Bachelor of Arts in Science. I don't think I had declared a major. If I had, it would have probably been biology, or it might have been geology if I'd ever figured out I could get a job doing that, which I could have. But no, I did. I went about a half the quarter. They reclassified me 1A. I was not going to get drafted, and I know before I could get back reclassified and go through all of that rigmarole, they liable to have a draft notice out for me. So I said, I'm a, I'm sorry.
You were a volunteer when you joined the
Yeah.
service.
And actually I went to join the Navy. I knew a guy who had been on subs in the Navy, and he said, "You need to go in the Navy and get on nuclear subs, as long as you don't mind being, underwater." And I didn't have a problem with that. And so what I didn't know was I have really bad motion sickness. I would have probably suffered at first. But anyhow, so I said, but he said, you learn to do everything on the ship. You learn a lot of good skills. You can make a good living when you get out. So I went down to the federal building in Savannah, and I went downstairs where all the recruiters were. And I was walking down the hallway looking for the Navy recruiter, and the guy in uniform says, "May I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm looking for the Navy recruiter." He says, "Oh, okay, good. Come right in here. Have a seat." And his phone rang. He said, "Have a seat." So I sat down, and while he was on the phone, I looked around, and, everything in there said Army. It didn't anything say Navy. So he got off the phone. I said, "I don't think you're the Navy recruiter." He says, "No, I'm not." But I hope he made a good living in sales after he got out of the Army, because he was a good salesman. He says, I'll take you down there and introduce you to those guys, though." He said, "I know them real good. They're friends of mine." He says, "I'm going to tell you right now, they don't have anything as good to offer as what I do. So sit here just a second and let me talk to you and tell you what I've got to offer you. And then we'll go down there and we'll see." And he named them, So I'm thinking, what have I got to lose, except I know I'm going to join the Navy. There's nothing this guy can do to make me join the Army. So I need to back up to the University of Georgia, where I was in Air Force ROTC. And my plan was to make it through 4 years of college and then become a jet pilot in the Air Force. That was my goal. So now all of that's just kind of been blown, to smithereens. And here I am talking to an Army recruiter when I want to be talking to a Navy recruiter. And all of a sudden he begins to ask me questions. And then he tells me that I might be a candidate for warrant officer flight training to fly helicopters in the Army. And I'm going like, what? No, you got to be kidding me. But, I didn't. So anyhow, long story short was he kind of sold me on it. So then he did like he said. He took me down to see the Navy recruiters and introduced me to them. So there was two guys. There, and I told them basically what I wanted to do, and they said, "Well, it doesn't really work that way. Here's the way it works." And I said, "Well, can I get an enlistment for this period of time?" "No, it's going to be a year longer than that." And so we went all the way down my checklist, and they were all no's. No, 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 no. So I had more yeses than I had no's for flight school. So then I went to get physically examined and take a test to see if I qualified for flight school, and I did. And so I enlisted for warrant officer flight training, not knowing how bad my hearing was. I passed hearing tests, okay? Passed hearing test. And yeah, so I went in the Army. I went in on April 15th of 1969. Went to base. I was inducted at in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, at fort there. I think they renamed it too. All those Southern general names, they're all renamed. But anyhow, they flew me out to Louisiana, to Leesville, Louisiana, for basic training. And that was my first flight ever on an airplane. I never had any kind of flight experience. I just loved learning things about flying. So I flew on the first flight from Columbia, South Carolina to Atlanta, where we held in traffic over Atlanta for 30 minutes or more than 30 minutes probably, at about 10,000 feet in a racetrack pattern, which knocked me down. I was so airsick. I didn't know what to do. Then we had to defer to our secondary landing location, which was in Tennessee, somewhere in Tennessee, I forget. And we had to land there and refuel. And boy, I filled up a barf bag on the way down, right on short final, when we went in to refuel. And then we went back up, and guess what? This time we got in a holding pattern. I think it was at 8,000 feet, racetrack pattern. And by then, the only thing that made me feel a little bit better, there was an Army captain sitting beside me, and he was airborne. And he was a little under the weather, too. So I didn't feel so bad about it, though. I did chunk in another bag on short final when we were landing in Atlanta. And then we flew somewhere into Texas. I don't remember where. And we got on a pedal jumper, which was an old plane used for paratroopers to jump out of, a C-3. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. And we got on one of those and flew from that airfield in Texas to Louisiana to basic training at Fort Polk, which has been renamed. and I did basic training there. Basic training was an eye opener for me. I didn't know I was a spoiled brat, but I was, and I don't mind admitting it today. I was very immature. On top of that, I was very immature. I had a tremendous amount of growing up to do, and the Army did a good job of helping me out on that while I was in basic training. The very first day of basic training, so far I had been through induction, where we sat around and rubbed our heads because they felt so weird because we didn't have any hair. You know, we all got a buzz cut. And we waited to get issued our uniforms, which we never got them all at one time. And we were issued a razor, and everybody got lemon lime shaving cream. And everything was either lemon or lime, and mostly lime jello. To this day, I won't eat lime jello, and I don't want to get anywhere near anything that's lemon lime, particularly shaving cream. So it's these little things that when you have an unpleasant experience, it's those sights and scents and stuff, you know, to hang with you. So yeah, huh?
The memory of smells is with you
Yeah,
forever.
right.
So,
And all these people, you know, and so eventually we got our stuff together, so-called supplies and uniforms, and they marched us over to our basic training areas. And it was that day that I said to myself, Carl, what the hell have you done? You must be completely stupid. This is not anything like what I thought it was going to be. I could not imagine what it was like. There was no way to imagine. My dad was in the Army. He got drafted when he was 30 and had 2 kids. And he was in the occupation army in Japan. He never saw combat, but all he could tell me was how much he hated the Army. And when I told him I was going to join the Army, I was just disgust on his face. That's all it was. He couldn't believe that I was actually going to do that. So I didn't have anybody to coach me. You know, my brother said, don't join the Marines. All I'd ever learned how to do was slit somebody's throat, which of course is not true by any means. And I would have been proud to be a Marine. I have very good friends who are Marines, but yeah, I had quite a shock. But I was not a person who was scared of, you know, doing things. And my parents had taught me enough common sense to get by. And the other thing that I learned right off the bat was if you did what they asked you to do, you were going to be a hero because everybody else was trying to do nothing or get out of doing it something. And so I just did what I was asked to do, and I tried to be good at it. And right away, they made me what we called an acting squad leader. Uh, we weren't real squad leaders. We wore a little band on our arms that everyone else despised.
Okay. Now, what was your rank when you went in?
I was Private E1.
Okay.
And then I did well in basic training. I did well in some of the physical competition, other than low crawling. I was never, I can't. So anyhow, they offered me a promotion to E2 at right at the end of basic training. And they only offered those to just a few people. If you were squad leader or platoon leader and such as that, you'd get E2. Everybody else would stay E1 until some point in AIT. So I knew that I was going to warrant officer flight training, which I'd get a automatic promotion to E5 for pay purposes. And so I'd be called a warrant officer candidate. And so I knew that was fixing to happen in just a matter of days. So I didn't need the promotion to E2. It wasn't going to help me at all. But I had a guy in my squad who he really did help me out a lot. And he was always there when I needed him. So I asked the platoon sergeant, would they give him to E2? And they did. So I went from E1 to E5. And then I went from E5 to W1 when I got out of flight training.
Okay. So, what interested you in learning how to fly helicopters?
I just wanted to learn how to fly, and I had watched them overhead, and I had watched the news in Vietnam, and to be able to fly, even if it was a helicopter, I mean, that was even more fascinating because jets can go really high, super fast, and go fast, long distances and do all kind of aerobatics. But helicopters could land over there in the field and take off out of the field, in a small area and things like that, which fascinated me. And so I went to Fort Walton, Texas, and the first 30 days were just, it made boot camp look like a picnic. I'm not kidding you. It made boot camp look like a picnic. We got less sleep. We were harassed unbelievably. It wasn't like, it was a struggle. Let me say that I was in a holding company for about 30 days while we waited to go to our walk class. And we were called snowbirds, warrant officer candidate class. And we had the people who were waiting to go to the class were called snowbirds. And this was in August in 80 miles west of Houston, 80 miles west of Fort Worth, in a hot area, dry, hot weather. And all we could do was sit around and wait and get harassed. And so what would happen is we had our bunks all made up, and they would tell us, okay, they weren't made up right. So, get out in formation. The place was filthy and whatever. And we'd get out there in formation, and then they'd try to find everything they could wrong with our uniform. And there was a lot of physical harassment, a lot of verbal abuse. There was every opportunity given to become antagonized and show that you might punch somebody, and if you did, you were gone, But so there was a lot of that going on, and I volunteered to fight grass fires to get out of that. Yeah, and then I volunteered to give blood to get out of that. So, I don't know how many people were there originally, but there was a whole barracks of people right next to us, and they were called blackbirds. And they were the guys who never even went to the first day of flight school. They were the guys that couldn't take the harassment and they quit before they ever had one day in flight school. Yeah.
So how
So
many started flight school and how many of you
in,
finished flight school?
in my class, there were over 300 of us that went up on the hill the first day. I don't remember, it was 300 and some odd number, and we graduated 82. So it didn't get any easier. Yeah. So after the first 30 days of actually being in flight school, which again was all kinds of forms of formality. The Army had all these rules that you had to learn to follow as to how to behave. And we had to learn how to do all that. We were constantly nitpicked by not only the TAC officers and the TAC sergeants, but also by more senior candidates, warrant officer candidates. And so people just continued to quit. Then after 30 days, we went to actually fly. And once we started flying, we had to solo in 10 to 12 hours. So about the time you had 10 hours, you say again?
That's all the flight training you had before you soloed.
Right. 10 hours and you were open to solo. And so you can imagine how many guys didn't make it. And some people were set back. And I had a difficult period right then. My instructor pilot was a major, and I weighed 118 pounds. I was 5'11" and a half, and I weighed 118 pounds. I had a sergeant in basic training told me if I'd stand sideways and stick out my tongue, I'd look like a zipper. Of course, my name is Zipperer, but I mean, I was a beanpole. So this is a small little 2-person helicopter. We called it a Mattel Messerschmitt because it was so small, and it had 5 rubber bands that drove the transmission from the engine. It turned the drive shafts. 5 rubber bands. I'm serious, and so that's why we call it that. And any small change I mean, if you had a bottle of water and you threw it out, you were almost going to know the difference in the CG. I'm exaggerating, but my instructor pilot, when he got out of the helicopter, it flew so much differently, I couldn't get adjusted to it. So I was able to make my takeoff. But then when I came into land, I mean, it was so light, and I started bobbing around like a round wash tub in a ocean full of waves. I was just everywhere. I finally got it down on the ground. It scared the living hell out of me. That was the end of my flying for that day. I went back, and when I got back to the barracks, I told the guy that was he was our officer. I can't think what we called him right now. Anyhow, he was officer in charge of our platoon. I told him I'd had enough. I quit. I said, "You've been begging me the whole friggin' time for me to quit. And I'm here to tell you I quit. I've had it." And he said, and I mean, he's sitting behind his desk. I'm sitting in front of his desk. It's your typical old, gray metal Army desk and Army, chairs and stuff, file cabinets here and there. It actually was a barracks room, but it was set up as an office. He looked at me over his desk and he said, "You can't quit." I thought it was some kind of, I mean, he was a pretty good guy all in all, I thought it was some kind of weird joke maybe. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you can't quit. We've got too much invested in you at this point, and you can't quit. Ah, boy, you're talking about now. I didn't sleep at all that night. So I had to go out to the flight line. And so I didn't wear my flight suit. I wore my ODs and showed up at the flight line. And I went to the my flight instructor's desk, who he happened to be the flight commander. Everybody else had a warrant officer for an instructor pilot. Guess what I had? I had a major. You know, I had a major for a flight instructor. Tell me that wasn't intimidating. You get right out of basic training and your instructor is a major. Okay. You know, later on, that didn't bother me, but it was much later on.
So you had somebody that was quite experienced.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, and I learned, well, that's a story for later. Yeah, exactly. And he was furious when he saw me in fatigues. And I told him that, that I was going to quit. And he said, you're not going to quit. You're absolutely not going to quit. And, and I forgot to mention, I had to go to my TAC officer. That's what I call him. A fantastic guy. Just absolutely fantastic guy. He made me go to the dispensary and see a flight surgeon. And so what they told me is that they weren't going to let me quit either. They were going to declare that he's the only way I could quit is if I declared fear of flight.
Okay.
What? Fear of flight? There's no way in hell I'm going to say that. I wasn't afraid of flying. I was afraid of dying because I didn't think I had enough skills, you know. And so anyhow, so he said he was going to sit me back 2 weeks and let me be in another flight class. And now I'm going to be with all these guys I don't know, and I'm going to be a setback. So everybody kind of looks back at the setback, like, all right, what's wrong with this guy, you know? So did I want to be a setback? No. I go out to the flight line. I speak to my instructor pilot, and I tell him that I'm going to be set back. That's what it was. He said, no, you're not. I'm stopping that. He said, you're not going to be set back. He said, you're going to show your ass up back out here tomorrow in your flight suit, and I'm going to give you another flight instructor. You're going to have an entirely different instructor pilot. That's what's going to happen. Well, that was better than getting set back. At least I got another chance with a different IP, not knowing what the problem was even, okay? So I get this guy, and I left out one picture that I meant to bring. So let's go get me my certificate up off the wall. My the one picture you said I should include. Anyhow, so I met this warrant officer. He said he was my IP. We got in the helicopter. I fired it up, you know, did all my checks, pulled it up to hover, called the tower, took off, went around the pattern 3 times. He says, okay, when I landed the 3rd time, he says, I'm getting out. You're going to do great. He got out. I flew around the pattern 3 more times by myself, landed, and it was never any looking back from there. So to solve that issue, it was a thing which I learned later. It was a thing of center of gravity. Like I said, all that weight being and the gas tank. It was a 40-pound gas tank on his side, you know. So it was just a little bit difference in how I held the pedals and how much throttle I needed to give to get the aircraft to do what I wanted it to do. And when I had somebody that was closer to my weight in there, then I didn't have to adjust for all that difference. You know, I didn't feel the need of it being that different. So I did fine. I left Fort Walters, went home for Christmas, came back, finished up flight school at Fort Walters. I took a leave and went home for a very short period of time, and then drove up to. Let's see. No, here's what. Yeah, I rode with some friends from Texas all the way to Georgia, then got on the bus and rode home from on the bus. And then I got up with another one of those guys, and he and I rode together to Fort Rucker. He was from Columbia, South Carolina. He picked me up, and we rode to Fort Rucker together. And I went to. We started off. We we started off with instrument flight training. Boy, was that loads of fun.
Yeah. So night flying on that?
I'm sorry?
Were you night flying on the instrument training?
I don't remember doing any night flying and instrument training, but we did link trainers. It was, let me show this before we get any further along. Let's see here. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Almost. Maybe hold it a little bit closer. Yeah. A little higher too, please.
How's that?
I think that's good. Maybe a little higher.
Okay.
Raise it up just a bit.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. That looks good.
Good. I can't get my arm any higher than that.
Okay.
Okay. So what this is, our bus, one of our bus drivers or one of our IPs, I don't remember exactly, that took us to the flight line. They would always buy donuts, and whenever someone did something that was unusual or anything happened or just something for a comical thing, we had this guy, and he could draw. He drew this. He drew that originally on a donut box, on the inside of a donut box, or and the top lid, And so this says Flight Charlie 12. That was the flight I was in. And there's a little notation here that points to the pilot that says Zip, which that's what most people call me, was Zip. And it said this is certified that on 7 October 69, CT Zipperer did alone and unassisted takeoff and return to stage field 5, thereby successfully completing his first solo flight. And it was signed by Chester W. Carlock, Flight Charlie 12 flight instructor. And of course, this was the kind of helicopter that I flew in training. That was a TH-55, and it shows it all banged up on a tree. Which, okay, it was a wonderful day. But they showed me that I gave them a little worry, No, it's a great group of flight instructors. Great group. I'm sorry?
How long was your flight training?
It was 5 months of primary school, warrant officer training in primary school at Fort Walters. And then when we went to Fort Rucker, which is now named for the general who was in the movie. We Were Soldiers in the book. That is renamed. It's named for that general. I just can't remember his name. Harold. I can't remember his last name. He was a great guy, super great guy. I knew a guy who knew him. I knew the guy who wrote the book for him and told his story, who was there.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably know him too. Anyhow, I'm sorry. Yeah. So Fort Rucker was the first thing. It was 4 months long, and it was the first the first few weeks was instrument training, and then we went into flying the Huey, and we flew the A and B model Hueys. And I had one flight instructor, and he would have us count all the little square patches on the sides of the helicopters anywhere they were. And if the count was over a certain amount, we would red X that helicopter for any reason that we could, because he said those little square patches were bullet holes that had been patched, and he didn't want to fly anything that had been shot up that much. They all had prior service in Vietnam.
Okay. So, when did you get your orders cut for Vietnam?
Right after I graduated. I think probably the day I got my wings, because at that point in time I was ready to go home, and everybody got the orders. I might have got them before then, actually, because we all went and got shots. Because I knew a fellow that was I had been his roommate at Fort Walters, and he didn't pass the TB test. So he showed positive on the test. So they held him back. He ended up going. He said, he'd shown positive before, but he didn't have it. He just showed positive. So yeah, I got my orders probably before then. But I was just assigned to a place in near Saigon. And that's how I was told to report to. I was given 30 days leave, and then I was told to report in early July to Travis Air Force Base in California, and then I flew from Travis Air Force Base to Hawaii, and from Hawaii I flew to, I think it was Guam, and then from Guam to an air base near Saigon, and then I was there. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, what year was this?
That was I arrived in Vietnam on July the 7th, 1970. So I was 20 years old, and they when I went to Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah to have my will filled out and all that information and sign up for insurance policy. The guy there in the JAG office told me he had been stationed in the JAG office at Chu Lai, and it was a great place to be stationed because all the helicopter pilots ever did was fly up and down the beach and look at the nurses bathing on the beach. Okay. So I get there to and I probably would have got assigned to the Marical Division anyhow, but I volunteered for it because of what he said.
And what was the Marical Division?
The Marical Division was in one of the worst places you could be. You didn't go off post unless you expected to get attacked, by a VC. In the daytime, it wasn't so bad if you had a Jeep full of people with M16s, but you dare not ever go out at night. That was just out of the question. We owned it in the daytime, but they owned it at night. And they rocketed us in Chu Lai regularly. They mortared us occasionally. It was a war going on right outside of our door. So then I was in southern I Corps. And the further north you got, then was Da Nang, about 30 miles to the north. And then you started getting on further up just north of Da Nang. Once you got around Monkey Mountain, you were really in bad guy country. And you got up around Khe Sanh and areas like that. And luckily, I never went any further than Monkey Mountain and Da Nang to the north. And though I did go to pretty much the southern limits of southern I Corps, but we had like 4 areas coming in off the Ho Chi Minh Trail in our area of operation. In our AO, we had about 4 main channels that somebody was constantly keeping their eye on those areas. So looking for the NVA coming in, or people bringing weapons or ammunition in, supplies, anything. Yeah. So they sent me to the Miracal Division. I was assigned to the 16th Combat Aviation Group, 14th Combat Aviation Battalion, the 176th Assault Helicopter Company. But before that, I got to go to the New Guy Center. And it was basically to have an opportunity to get used to the climate in South Vietnam. Well, if you take a look at the map and you spin it around, you'll see that in latitude that Savannah, Georgia and Chu Lai, Vietnam are just about the same latitude. And when I got off the airplane, it was familiar to me, heat and humidity. The only thing that I will never forget was the smell of burning human feces. And I know it was the same in later wars.
Right.
But that smell stayed with me for many, 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 many years. Let me tell you, it was not good. The other thing I remember getting off is these guys sitting up casually in these faded old uniforms, just sitting up casually like this. They didn't even look up, sunglasses on. And when you walk by, they say, "Got any stateside cigarettes? Got any stateside cigarettes?" And I didn't appreciate that until I got my first, in-country cigarettes, and then I understood it perfectly. There's no telling how many years old they were.
Excuse me. I think a lot of people didn't know that the Vietnam vets were exposed to the burn pits. They associate that more with the Gulf Wars.
Right. Well, there was less of the burn pit thing. What we had was a little building that was screened in usually, and it had 2 half of 55-gallon drums under 2 holes or 3 holes or 1 hole, whatever it was. And then behind that would be 1 to swap out, or 2 or 3 to swap out. And the ones that weren't under the seat were in the back. Well, they would come around every day and pour diesel fuel on them and burn them. So there was everywhere, there was columns of smoke going up from, the burning excrement. That was the worst thing. But they sprayed us with DDT. They sprayed us with Agent Orange. It was all kind of spray spillover that was happening. So we were subject to a lot of those chemicals. And if you were in the Navy, no telling what you were exposed to, or if you were working directly on an airfield, you were really exposed to hazardous chemicals, worse than what pilots were by any means. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask about Agent Orange complications that you've had.
Yeah, I had throat cancer, and it was classified as Agent Orange induced or whatever. And I did receive at one time 100% disability for throat cancer, and the residuals up to a point. Oops. And then they dropped that, though, a little bit further down the line. But yeah.
What did they drop it to?
They dropped it. I also received a gunshot wound, and so with everything, they dropped it to 70%. Then they increased it to 90%. And then eventually they increased it to 100%. And later on, something like irrevocable or something like that. I don't know how they classify it. When I don't have to get examined ever again.
Okay, so that's total and permanent.
Uncontestable, something, yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
And
And
are you still having trouble with the residual from the throat cancer?
oh boy, the cancer I'm not having any problems with. It's the residuals from the radiation and the chemotherapy that did a number on me. Yeah, it seemed to inflame my arthritis, and I have had problems with arthritis all along. Had surgery on my right knee, had surgery on my right wrist, but after the chemo and the radiation, and as I began to recover uh, from cancer and the cancer therapy, then all of a sudden it's like everything started going wrong. I started having hernias, um, and I had to have hernia repair, inguinal hernia repair on the right side twice and once on the left side, and I had a complete changeover of my mesh in my stomach. I think I had that before I had cancer, though. I may be wrong on that. I think I did. Anyhow, um, then my wrist just got to the point where one doctor recommended having both of them fused. Um, the next doctor that I talked to said, um, "Why don't you think about it?" And we discussed it at great length. And I decided against having that done. And we've since consulted about it. And what I'm doing right now is I'm going and getting shots in my wrist or my hand about every 3 months. And I have some serious back trouble, and I get a shot in my spine. Uh, I try not to go, let's just say anywhere from 4 to 6 months, somewhere like in there, I'm getting a shot in the spine. And I just endure quite a bit of pain. So I've taken the pain clinic, and I'm going to yoga once a week.
Okay. And are you seeing Dr. White at the pain clinic for your back, or are
I'm
you
online.
you're online?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
online.
Just
And
started.
it's Jacqueline. I can't remember her last name.
You're getting care in the community for that done.
No, it's just like this. It's it's a it's a VA class. It's a online class. It's not any kind of it's every kind of therapy other than drugs.
So they're helping you cope with the pain and learning some skills to
Right.
help with.
Exercises, diet, and things like that. And I'm hoping I mean, I've been through this pain long enough I've learned quite a bit. I went to physical therapy for about a year and a half. And so I know a good deal, but I'm taking this class in hopes that something new will come out of it that will help me, uh, because I do endure quite a bit of pain. I've learned, uh, I've learned as soon as I start getting a little back pain, I go soak in a hot tub or go to my friend's. He's got a hot tub, my mushroom guru.
Okay. So you mentioned you got shot. So tell me that story.
Yeah, it was just a regular day, except it was New Year's Eve. It was December the 31st of 1970. And I was just flying a regular resupply mission, pretty much like I always did. What we did was we flew um, combat assault, where we put troops in or pull troops out, or we flew special forces, or we flew rangers. And those were always putting somebody in, taking somebody out, that sort of thing. And then we had to resupply the troops that were in the field. And you never knew what you were going to encounter in those situations either. And so we worked for the 198 Infantry Brigade primarily. There were several other brigades, but our sister companies supported those units, and then we filled in whenever we needed to. They helped us and things like that. We went down south and helped out. So I would work an area anywhere from 60 miles south of Chulai to 60 miles north of Chulai and all the way out to the Laotian border. And it varied quite a bit, but in how far that was. But mostly we went out kind of northwest when we went out to or into Laos, which we were never officially in Laos, but we were there. So that day, I was delivering resupply to the 1st to the 52nd Infantry Battalion out of Fire Support Base Stinson. And that was about a 15-minute flight southwest of Chulai. And I had to work all the surrounding area. I think I might have even worked for the 1st to the 6th, which was an overlapping fire base called Dottie. And it was east of Stinson. But like I said, I think they had overlapping fields of fire. Anyhow, I worked for I was working for the 1st to the 52nd, and I got a radio call from my best friend, Reg Cleve. He was Minuteman 2-1, and he said he had a tail rotor chip detector light that had illuminated, which meant that he was getting metal particles in his tail rotor gear, the drive gear. So that may or may not be an emergency where you wanted to go right back to base. It was the pilot's decision, and the pilot would consult with the crew chief and see what the crew chief's opinion was. He would remember how much play was in that tail rotor and all that kind of stuff when he checked it out. So, basis of all that, he decided to go home or not. So what he did was Reg called me and asked me. He said he had 2 more sorties working for the 5th to the 46th, and he wanted to know, could I finish up his 2 missions for him? And I said, yeah, take off. Don't take any chances. Go take it back in, get it checked out, and I'll finish those 2 missions because I'm through now. I'm running back to Chulai to refuel. So I went back to Chulai, refueled, and went up onto the north end of Chulai East runway, which was the original runway. And I went up to the pad there for the 198th Brigade, and I picked up one guy that was going out into his unit for the first time ever, a brand new FNG replacement. And I had to put him out in his unit, and I picked up a backpack for another guy who must have been an FNG because he didn't know. I mean, he left his backpack and he's going out to a field unit. What? How does that happen? You go to get on an airplane, but you leave your luggage in the car? I don't think so. So anyhow, he was scared to death, I guess. So I load up. I've got the backpack and I've got the one guy in the back. And so my co-pilot for the day, another brand new FNG, he's a lieutenant. He's a 1st lieutenant. It's his first day ever flying a combat mission. It's his first day ever flying in the AO other than his orientation flight, where one of our Czech pilots would fly him around and kind of show him the broad area and put him through the maneuvers and make sure he, had 30 days off, make sure he's back in, got everything going okay. Check ride. So I got this guy, and he's a nice enough guy. And so we head out now we're getting out into, we were in some bad guy country where we were, but now it's different. We're more likely to come up on some heavy weapons or anything like that. This is all triple canopy jungle. You don't want to, lose an engine anywhere out there. You got to be real careful what routes you take. So if you do lose an engine, you're not going down in the trees. There's a lot of thought into making these missions. And you don't know where these guys are located generally until, you make contact with them and tell them to pop smoke. You might know roughly where they're located. So when I went out to deliver that backpack, I called and I remembered the unit that I had resupplied them the day before. And what did I give them? I dropped them an axe down through the trees so they could chop out an LZ. And that's a hard way to make an LZ. They probably used a little C4 too, but I didn't figure there was any way that in that short period of time that they could have chopped out an LZ. And sure enough, I come over, I'm 1,500 feet above the ground, and I'm checking out the landing zone below, trying to figure out where the wind direction is and how I'm going to make my approach and so forth. And I know I can't land in that little tiny hole they've got. For one thing, it just was too small. There's no way I was going to take a chance going in there. So I lined up. I flew over, from east to west, and I lining up for what's called a high overhead approach. And in a high overhead approach, you cross your landing trajectory perpendicular, and then you break into a turn on whichever side the pilot's sitting on, whoever's flying the aircraft. And I was the aircraft commander, so I was sitting on the left side. And this guy over here in the right seat, the only thing he's supposed to do is take over if I get hit. Other than that, I don't want him anywhere near the controls. Okay? At least not until we get back. Yeah. So I go across the trajectory. I put it into a 45-degree left bank. The idea is to make 3 turns, lose 500 feet per turn, and then come in on a straight-in approach into the wind and set it down or do which I told him I wasn't going to land. There was no way I was going to make a low-pass bomb run. So when I got down to where I was just at treetop level, I pulled back on the cyclic and pulled my nose up high, and the crew chief threw that backpack out, while we were at really low altitude and not so high off the ground. And then I pulled all the power I had and started to climb out. Oh, what I failed to mention was as I called to let the guys know that I was, pop smoke, that I wanted to land, they informed me that they had taken fire from a sniper about 15 minutes before. And that and I asked what was the location of the sniper, and they said he fired from the east. So, okay, that's all I need to know, because, why were these guys out there? They were out there to make contact, to find the enemy and kill them. So them having been in contact was nothing new. And if they needed us to bring in bullets while they were in contact, we did a little of that too. So they told me, I could expect fire possibly from the east. So I came in, everything was okay. I was lined up north to south. That put the east on my left side. I could hear if we had any fire, because sometimes you get shot at, I didn't even hear it. So like I said, now I'm back into my climb out, and I get about 400 feet off the ground. And the next thing I know, I'm taking fire. So, I was ready if I took fire. So I dove for the ground, broke to the right. That way I'd get away from where that guy was shooting from the east. And I would get down close to the ground where I was out of the field of vision. You think if you're in a tube and a helicopter goes over, you can't see him but just a second if he's real low. If he's up high, you got a longer time, to take aim at him. So that was the idea. And what I didn't know is he wasn't firing at me from the east. When I looked at the bullet hole in the aircraft where he hit me, that bullet came straight in the nose, right above the chin bubble. And how it missed my left knee, I don't know. So I was diving right straight at him is what that amounts to. So he had changed position, or there was another sniper, and it was somewhere. He probably fired a good clip at me before he hit me, and it knocked me back off the controls. The bullet hit me in the back of the leg. I didn't know exactly what had happened at the time. All I knew was all of a sudden I was in horrendous pain. That was because the bullet traveled up the sciatic nerve at the top of my thigh. And I don't know what exactly did happen. I know I still had my hand on the cyclic because I was using the microphone. And that's on the cyclic, the left pedal, the left button I couldn't use. But anyhow, yeah, so I'm diving for the ground. I've been hit, and all I see is I, I remember telling the co-pilot, I probably screamed at him loud enough he could probably hear it without me keying the mic. But I told him 3 times, I'm hit, you've got it. I'm hit, you've got it. I'm hit, you've got it. I see all this green rushing up. I look over at him, and he's got his head covered up, hiding behind the armor plate on the right-hand side. And I know I'm dead because, like I said, everything's green is rushing up. And then the next thing I remember hearing radio calls, and that seemed to have woke me back up. I think I passed out from the pain. Is the only thing I can figure out. How I went from all this green rushing up and him over there covering up to all of a sudden now we're up in the clouds. And I've got the guys on the ground telling me I've been taking fire. And I said, yeah, I knew it. And I was hit. And so they tried to get me to come back there. I wasn't going to do that. I saw a nice big rice paddy out there that this guy sitting in the right seat could land in, but he was now flying the helicopter. And I learned later from my gunner, who at the point that I woke up and I saw we were heading west, not east. We need to be heading east back to Chulai, or out that direction. And I saw more hills and the clouds getting lower, which told me we were going the wrong way. And so I said, do you know how to get us back to Chulai? And he said, no, which that wasn't a shock. That's why I asked him the question. He didn't have enough experience to know that. Okay. So he was scared to death. I mean, hey, I wasn't doing too good either, you know. I had to tell my gunners to go cold. They were shooting the place all to hell and back, and I was where's the good guys at, you know. And so I told them to go cold, and then I asked my pilot, did he know how to get us back? He said no. I said Tyagi, he was the gunner. I said, Tyagi, tell how to get us back to Chulai. And he said, turn left and lose altitude. Now he tells me he said turn right and lose altitude. So it's just like everything else. Everybody remembers it differently. But Chulai was to our left, as I remembered. And anyhow, my pilot did lose altitude. He did turn to the left. He got us down out. I started making radio calls. As a result, a friend of mine who had just got into operations office from flying a mission, Minuteman Zero, he heard my radio call and he went back out and with his crew and jumped in his helicopter and he came to get me. And then there was another guy, we called him Ogre. His name was Handel. He was flying the 198th Brigade commander, who was a bird colonel, and he had with him a major and a captain and the command sergeant major and an E5, and he had a 900-pound radio console, so he could talk around the world if he wanted to. But they were outside the helicopter when he heard my call. They closed the doors and took off and left their entourage on the ground. And one of them led my pilot, and one of them followed my pilot, and they guided him to the 27th MASH. I should have put that picture in there too. I got a great picture they gave me while I was in the hospital. Yeah, they flew me to the 27th MASH and they dropped me off. I went inside. It was just like the movie MASH. You know, there I go in the building, they wheel me in there. I'm in horrendous pain. There's flies buzzing around. There's two gurneys over to the side. All the lights and all the people are right over those two gurneys, you know, and they're not paying any attention to anything outside of that circle of people. As a guy comes in, starts cutting my clothes off, taking my personal belongings. And I said, man, I got to have something for the pain. I'm in horrendous pain. And he said, it's got to be a doctor to give you something for the pain. I can't do that. I said, get a doctor, you know. And he said, all the doctors are right over there working on those two guys that stepped on a booby trap. I said, can I smoke a cigarette? He said, yes. So I'm in the emergency room. I light up a cigarette. Nothing said, you know. And 3 hours later, you know, they were still working on those guys. And they had wheeled me off into another room. And I remember when they were doing some x-rays, my company commander came in and took my SOI. We wore a notebook around our neck, and they were published once a week or more frequently if they felt like our codes had been, all of our codes and call signs had been compromised, which they always were. So we never used them. We used our assigned call signs. I was Minuteman 227. I didn't go by goofy whatever 69 or 34 or whatever that was in the SOI book, you know. Anyhow, company commander took my SOI, never said a word other than that. Where's your SOI? Thank you. He was gone. So I was in the hospital there for several hours. All the guys came, and they came crowding in the room I was in, and I'm laying on my stomach with my bare butt up in the air, you know.
Right.
I got a bloody rump. And let me tell you, it didn't bleed until then. It was about 3 hours. It didn't even bleed. So I guess it was that the bullet was so close. It blew me open is what it did. It blew my cheek open, cheek of my butt. So I'm thinking maybe the bullet was that hot. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a lot of blood vessels right there. But I remember holding that place in my hand and looking at my hand, and there was no blood on my flight glove. But then it started bleeding when everybody got there, and I started laughing. I was in shock kind of then, and the pain, it had been so long, the pain had gone away. And when I started all that cutting up, well, it started bleeding and it started hurting again. But they came in. There was about 15 to 20 guys, crew chiefs and gunners and pilots and co-pilots. And so the one guy, he says, I was checking out your aircraft. He said, and there's no blood anywhere in it. And he said, I think you just got so scared you sucked the seat up your ass. That's a saying we had learned. You know, you get it was used in flying. You get so scared, you suck the seat up your ass. So he said, there was just this big hole. We had this fiber that stretched over a metal frame, like sitting in a deck chair or something, you know. And when the bullet hit it, before it went into my leg, it blew a big hole in it. It was stretched tight, and it popped it open as it traveled up. And so he said, I thought you just sucked the seat up your ass. He said, but I looked in that hole, and right down there at the bottom of your armor plate, there was this. And he held up an AK-47 round with tip busted off of it. And that piece of copper tip came out of the back of my leg in early March when I was in Hawaii. It festered up and came out. They had cut out screws and various pieces of aircraft metal out of the back of my leg, and then that bullet had just blown me wide open and exited, hit the armor plate in the back, and dropped into the bottom of the seat. And
So were you sent stateside to recover, or?
you know, I'm laying on that table and I'm asking that guy to give me something for pain, and he says, "Don't worry, man. You got the $1 million wound. You're going home." 5 days later, Dr. King, I still remember his name. Dr. King comes in and he says to me, "Oh, let me check it out here. Oh, you're looking good." He says, "I think we can sew you up now." He said, "It's healing up a little and there's no sign of infection. So we're going to sew you up. And in about 45 days, you'll be back out flying again." And I said, "Somebody told me I had the $1 million wound." He says, "Tell everybody that." So yeah, 45 days later to today, I was back out on my next mission. And where did they send me? Right back out almost near, almost the same place where I got shot. And I'm going to tell you, you know how sweat will burn a fresh wound, a scar? Well, I had a scar. I don't know how many stitches they used internally to pull the muscles together, but they used 12 wire stitches to close all that up. and that was quite uncomfortable. And where every one of those stitches were, I began to sting and burn, and that scar began to sting and burn as I lowered the collective pitch lever to go down to make my first landing back out into fifth of the 46 AO again. I want to tell you that nervous is not the word for what I felt. I was scared to death, I'm going to tell you.
I know. Yeah.
And that caused me to get a job I didn't want. I had the Brigade Charlie mission. I had the colonel on board, and I had one of his officers, and I had I think it was the XO. It was XO or somebody. Maybe it was the intelligence officer. I'm not sure. But he was a light colonel, and that was all. No, and I had a couple of other guys. I had the first sergeant too. So I'm gonna have to drop them out, not on a fire base someplace or not at the 1st of the 6th headquarters. Hell no. He wants me to drop them out on a river beach, on a curve in the river where there's some sandy beach where I can land, and put him out in a field unit. I couldn't believe it. Not only, I mean, this was a VIP mission. I wasn't supposed to be landing someplace like this, but this guy was different. Okay. So I come into land. I'm doing the same thing. I'm making a high overhead approach. And as I line up on my target to land, I see that I'm so high up still, there's no way that I can land in that little hole down there on the side of that river. And so I kind of like panicked to some extent, but then I'm going like, I'm not going to make a go around because I'd be low and slow and everybody would be a target. I kicked the helicopter out of trim. I pulled my cyclic back as hard as I could, stood that aircraft up on its tail and sideways and made it into a rock. And a rock falls. And when I caught my sight pattern again, I yanked all the power that I had and nosed it over and put it right straight down on the ground. And I mean, it was almost that fast. It was a controlled crash that I did land softly.
Crazy.
They got out. And now my blood's running. I got so much adrenaline in me. It was just unbelievable. I'm waiting to get shot at. I'm not hearing any fire. No one's firing out. I take off, and this was in a river valley, and it was all low trees like just not cottonwood, just any trees that grow quick, along a riverbed. They were just not any tall trees anywhere. And I pull that aircraft up, and I pushed the nose over, and I got the cyclic control lever up underneath my armpit, and I had the cyclic push forward as far as I could. And I started running until I had maxed out on the red line at 120 knots. And then I yanked the cyclic stick back, and I pulled even more power. And I started climbing out of there. I know going up and forward at that much of an angle, it's hard to hit somebody like that. And so I get up and I circle around at 1,500 feet now, and I'm waiting on them to call me back down. And I had violated quite a few rules because I was dodging in between the trees and stuff like that. I mean, I was not anywhere near above the nearest obstacle, 25 feet or 50 feet, I think is what it was. It's supposed to be 50 feet above the highest tree or whatever. And I was down into, I was down in the river, almost when I went down the river. But when I got up to altitude, then I relaxed back and I noticed I still had that lieutenant colonel on board. And I'm going like, oh my God, this is the brigade commander's, next in command or close to it. I'm in trouble now. So when he calls me back down, and I pick him up, and the day's over. I take him back. The next day, they assign me the same mission. And I'm not happy because I didn't really like flying Brigade Charlie, but they're giving it to me because it's supposed to be a safer mission and that sort of thing. And I couldn't go out there and do crazy stuff that we pilots did when we weren't being looked at real close. So I flew over to the 198 Brigade headquarters, which was where the beach was, where you actually did have nurses on the beach. Okay. It was where the 91st Evacuation Hospital was. It was where the Americal Division headquarters was. It was where the JAG office was. And all those helicopter pilots going up and down the beach, that was the traffic pattern. They weren't looking at anybody on the beach. There was nobody on the beach. Occasionally,
R&R, basically.
Occasionally, I mean, there was guys on the beach because, yeah, we went to the beach. But the only place you see nurses on the beach was out in front of the hospital. And that was about 100 yards of beach. And that was it. So I fly down there and I land right out near the beach at the 198 headquarters. And the brigade commander's pad was right beside the beach. It was a raised pad. And so we start, polishing the helicopter and stuff. We didn't do to any of the others, but we did polish his and keep it, really spit shined. And an E5 comes out and tells me to report to brigade commander. And I'm going like, okay, I knew this was coming. I remember what I did the day before, and I know this guy told on me. and this is not going to go well. So I report. I go right in there, bam, 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 on the door frame. He tells me to enter. I come up. I stand at attention. I salute. I report as directed or as ordered. And he says, have a seat. Have a cup of coffee. And I'm going like, okay, what is this? Have a seat. I'm not still standing at attention. Have a seat. Have a cup of coffee. I'm going like, I don't know what's going on here. And he says, my officer here, and he had that colonel sitting there, he told me what a fantastic job, you did getting out of the LZ. He says, and getting in there, it was just unbelievable. I didn't know, that you could fly a helicopter like that. He said, I want you to be my permanent pilot. Oh, no.
Crazy.
Permanent pilot? No, please, no. So, yeah, there I was, his permanent pilot, until somebody said, Carl, how would you like to, we want to make you assistant operations officer. How would you like to do that? And I said, I don't know, but we'll let you work at night. I'm going to work at night. Yeah, I'm going to sleep during the day. Yeah, okay, I'll take that job. So I took the job and I flew anyhow. They would give me, I didn't work in operations every night. And there was a lot of times they needed pilots, somebody that somebody else would sit in. But what eventually happened was I would be up all night long and I'd be listening to the radio and I'd hear what all was going on out in the area. And we would have a bird that flew around the base all night long to make sure that the enemy was not coming through the wire. And I mean, when we flew around the base, I'm talking about in places where they could infiltrate, we were right down with landing light, searchlight, 20, 30 feet off the wire, looking. And we were checking out away from the wire. And if we drew fire, we knew we had a problem, and that person would go out about anywhere between midnight and 1 o'clock and fly around the perimeter till about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and then come back down. And you had flares on board in case there was any contact in the immediate area, you would drop flares. So I had a really good RTO, radio technical operator, I think that stood for. He and I were in operations all night long. And after we got all the aircraft checked in the evening, and we figured out who all needs maintenance and that sort of thing, and what aircraft we had flyable, well, then we'd notify the platoon leaders, and they'd get their aircraft or another flight's aircraft if there wasn't enough available to them, and there was some extra in the other flight. They work out the aircraft, and they'd assign the pilots to the aircraft and to the missions. And so then about 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 or so, the pilots would start coming in. The crew chiefs and gunners would sometimes usually be the first ones in, and they had worked on maintenance on the bird, and they go back out again, and the pilot or the co-pilot, as we call him, the Peter pilot, would go and check the aircraft and make sure everything was up to snuff, or write up anything that was wrong with it that needed to be fixed and get another bird. So once that was happening, well, then once I got all that done, everybody was checked in, then I go eat breakfast and hit the rack and go to sleep. So I get up and eat in the evening, go to operations, go to work. And then what I decided was I could fly that perimeter patrol bird at night and relieve the company of having that burden for another pilot and free up somebody else for the daytime, because we were always running short. We were always flying max hours. If you just got completely worn out, you go to the dispensary and tell the flight surgeon, I don't feel good. I got a cold, and if we would fly about 120 hours a month. And then after that, we had to tell the flight surgeon we were okay to fly. Then we could fly 140 hours total, at which time we were grounded. And so it was like we flew 140 every month. And some of us, sometimes we didn't log all the hours just because we were short of pilots. So I flew that night perimeter patrol mission, and I had more nighttime than anybody. But they had sent me to flight to instrument school to get 2 weeks of extra training from a guy named Captain Carthage. And I remember him well because he was such a great pilot. He was a really, really nice instructor pilot. We had a great time together. And let me tell you, I almost busted out of flight school flying instruments. When you put a hood on me, I get airsick immediately. You put me in a link trainer closed in, and it's a machine, that you fly it and it turns and it moves up and down and left and right. I get airsick in that thing right off the bat, because you can only see on a little dial on the panel where you're going. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I passed flight school, instrument training, but I did, just by the skin of my teeth. Now, see, in the company area I was when I got into the company area where I was working, I told them I wanted to get a transition to the Hughes 500. The Army called it the OH-6 Loach. I wanted to fly one of those little birds so bad. And so I kept putting in for a transition. And my platoon leader came to me one day and he said, Zipperer, you've been asking for a transition so many times. He said, I got something for you here. I don't have a transition, but I got something here. You go into instrument school. You're going to be our company flight instrument instructor and check pilot. I'm going like, man, I almost died in instrument training. I can't be the one to do this, but it probably saved my life. I learned things that I had never learned. We just got a standard ticket. Not a standard ticket. We got a military ticket, not a standard ticket, a combat ticket. In other words, we could fly instruments in a combat situation, and that was it. Otherwise, we didn't go into clouds because we really weren't skilled enough, and there weren't enough signals around. So, give you an example. I'm taking training to be a flight check pilot and instructor pilot for just my company. And so my instructor, he says, today we want to get some real instrument training. Clouds are about 3,000 feet. Let's go up there and do some instrument work up in the clouds. So that's what I was there for, So up we go into the clouds. And so he says, I want you to get on the radio now and call Chulai and I want you to get a radar approach, GCA approach. That's what it was. Get you a GCA approach. And I'd shot GCA approaches time and time again, but never out of the soup, or in the soup. At night, I'd fly. I've done it, but now we're really actual instruments. So I call and they said GCA is down. Okay, no problem, So we've got what is now an ancient system where you dial in a beacon, and you got a little needle that points at the beacon, and you got these procedures that you follow, and you have a chart that you follow, and it tells you, what courses to maintain and for how long the time you turns and stuff. And then you go down and you descend when you get on a certain azimuth, and when you see the ground, if you can see it before you reach a certain altitude, then you go ahead and land. Otherwise, you pull out and try it again. So when I told them I wanted, I can't remember what to call it now. When I wanted an approach like that, they said that wasn't working either. So here we are up in the soup in Vietnam, and we don't have any instrument systems how to get us down without flying to Da Nang. And so Captain Carthage, in his infinite wisdom, says, okay, this is the monsoon season. Tell me what you know about our weather patterns here in the monsoon season. I said, well, it's the same every day. The clouds and storms roll in from the west, and they extend out over the ocean, 3, 4, 5 miles. And we get hammered. And he said, right. He says, now what does that tell you? I said, that tells me I'm flying to the east. I turned and I flew to the east until we flew out of the clouds. Then I dropped down to, a couple hundred feet off the ocean and low leveled in. And so he taught me a lot of nice things, which is then I got to be the check pilot, and I didn't have to fly under the hood. I put other people under the hood and watch them suffer.
I think we're going to take a little pause here.
That's fine.
For just a few minutes. And we'll
okay. I'm good for that.
Okay. Well, Carl, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm told we've got about 30 minutes.
Okay.
So, next thing I want to ask you about is Reg Clevey.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me about your friendship with him and that mission. And then I want to lead up to the time that you re-met the wife. And I want you to talk about the relationship that he and his wife shared when you were still in Vietnam, and your poem that you wrote about him.
Yeah.
So we'll start with how you and Reg met.
Yeah.
And how you shared your bunker.
The way we met primarily was we were both on going to fly a mission together. He was the aircraft commander, and I was his pilot. He was a tall guy. He had a deep low tone but commanding voice. Super nice guy. The minute that we were flying together, I felt relaxed. He let me fly quite a bit, which some aircraft commanders were like me, and they'd like to do all the flying. I got airsick if I wasn't on the control, so heck with the other guy, I'm gonna fly, you know. But no, he was a really good pilot, and I learned later that he had actual flying training before he was in the Army, and so he kind of like had a little bit of a head start. But my job was to do whatever he said do, you know, and look out for things if something happened to him. And his job was to command whatever went on with that helicopter, you know, make the missions happen. Uh, and I don't remember what our first mission was together. I know we flew mostly resupply together, um, and I flew with a guy named Jerry Penny, and we flew resupply together. We flew more combat assaults together, um, and I flew with a guy named Don West, and he was I didn't fly with him as much, but I did fly with him. He had other responsibilities. So the four of us were really tight, close friends. And if I wasn't, I was always flying pretty much with one of those guys. Occasionally I'd fly with somebody else. So what happened was we had Lamson 719, and that was an offensive that took place along Route 9 in Laos, and everybody was based out of Quang Tri and worked and operated out of Khe Sanh or the Special Forces camp near there, and they were taking South Vietnamese troops in to invade Laos to attack the NVA on the Ho Chi Minh Trail along Route 9. And just like everything else that happened in Vietnam, they knew about it probably before we ever even conceived that we were going. I mean, the NVA and the VEC knew everything we were doing. We were completely infiltrated. They knew everything we were going to do. So we started taking those forces in and dropping them off on hilltops, and helicopters started getting shot down. It was a whole different ball game. The Air Force, I read a document that the Air Force gave the Army, and the Air Force had tried to warn the Army what they were going to encounter when they got into Laos, because pretty much all the 37 millimeter anti-aircraft fire and things like that had been, we had pushed them out into the mountains. And if they didn't come out, we didn't go in, kind of that sort of thing, you know. We'd bomb them to death with B-52s. But here we were after them, and we did make a major difference because it delayed them invading the South by several years. This was 1971. They didn't finally invade until 1975, 76, somewhere in that neighborhood. So they were traveling along Route 9, and what Reg's mission was, they were extracting all the South Vietnamese troops. It had been as much of a disaster as it had been a success. It wasn't much. The air, you couldn't see where you were going. There was so much smoke and haze. And the enemy had come up with a new tactic where these fire bases that we created, they had wire all the way around them, and we could defend the outside zones with mortars and machine guns and that sort of things. But we would kill them if they were out away from us. We would kill them with B-52s. We would kill them with jets. We would kill them with helicopter gunships. But they had 37 millimeter anti-aircraft and 57 millimeter anti-aircraft, surface to air missiles, and all of these things protected with 50 cal machine guns, 51 cal. And they shot so many helicopters down. It was crazy. And on one of the last missions, they were trying to parachute drop supplies to these guys that were trapped with the NVA hugging the fire bases where they wouldn't get bombed. They'd hug the fire bases, and then we'd come into land they'd shoot everybody down. They'd jump up all at one time. So it was a disaster. They told everybody to turn around and go back to base. They weren't going to be able to supply them because the winds were too high and it was blowing the supplies off into the enemy hands. And as they were turning around, they actually got too far out than they were supposed to be. And they got out of the area that had been bombed by the Air Force. And they went apparently near a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft or something like that. Reg had a load of mortar shells on board. They were on pallets. He had pallets of them. And they were going to kick those out, but they still had him on board. And he got hit, they think, by 37 Mike as the flight was making a turn. And from 5,000 feet, he was at 5,000 feet, they got hit. And he went down in flames. And there's a lot of controversy over all of that. But net, Reg Cleve and his crew all were listed as missing in action. And no one was allowed to go rescue them because they were using people that had been shot down as bait to shoot more aircraft down.
Mm-hmm.
So
as I understand it, he actually took a second mission that day because you told me somebody had chickened out.
Yeah, looking back on that, I kind of, it's exactly what you said, but looking back on it, I understand it a little bit differently. I talked to the platoon leader, and what he told me was, I got a lot of detail from him, and he said that Reg, the guy said he was not going to go. He refused to go. And so they were looking as to what to do. And I was waiting for him to tell me to go, but I didn't know it. But they had pretty much decided I shouldn't go. I was still basically recovering. And so Reg went to he went to the platoon leader and he said, look here. He said, this guy should not be flying there. It's too crazy. It's too many people dying. There's too many things going wrong. He doesn't need to be there if he doesn't want to be there. I'm going to go in his place. And Reg had already been there one time, and we had it all worked out where nobody would have to go twice. Well, now he's going twice. And he did, and he got shot. He told me, I was working in operations that night. He called me on the radio. He said, I got a bad radio. And so I let him know we're going to bring him a new radio out. He left, and the whole flight left him and went on, and he's going to catch up with them later. And so he said, I want you to come out here to the aircraft. It was a pretty good height where he was. So we got on one of those little mules, and rode out there to the aircraft with the radio man. And while he was putting the radio in, I stood out front of the helicopter with the rotor blades turning at flight idle. And I remember just standing there talking to him. We could hard to hear. And he says, I've had a premonition and I know I'm not coming back.
Wow.
And I still have a hard time with this. Sorry. And I said, man, you're crazy. You're coming back. Don't say stuff like that. He says, no, I've had this premonition and I know I'm not coming back. And if I'm listed as missing in action and I'm dead, you got to tell my wife the truth. And so I said, okay, okay. But I knew he was coming back. I wasn't worried about it. And then he went up there. And then I found this letter. And he had written all that in there and how to contact his wife. He had written me this letter with all that stuff in it. He left me his, I got to keep talking, but it's hard. He left me his refrigerator and some stuff like that, and no, all that stuff was sent home. I didn't want any of it. I did he had a lucky ace of spades that G Company Rangers had given him for pulling him out under fire. I took that ace of spades. But I got drunk one night in Raleigh and I burned it. That was many years later. Yeah, and so as it turns out, he was listed missing in action. But I talked to plenty of people that were there, and no one expected to ever see him alive again. The aircraft crashed and burned, is what they said.
Yeah.
And so.
And he had left the letter for you in the barracks, right?
Yeah, he left this letter for me that I found it. So I wrote the letter to his wife. And it was probably the hardest, I know it's the hardest letter I ever wrote. I'm glad I didn't have to do things like that very often. But yeah, I wrote his wife and I told her that I waited until I knew that she had been notified, okay? Because it was against the rules to do anything like that. So I waited. And I wrote her and I said, I can't tell you that he's dead. All I can tell you is that none of us ever expect to see him again. And I enclosed the letter that he wrote me so she wouldn't think I was some kind of wacko, you know? Reg and I used to sit down and he'd read letters to me and show me the gifts his wife would send him. He had more letters than he had days in country.
You told me once that she would write to him up to 3 times a day.
Yeah, and send packages. It was just amazing. They had such a wonderful relationship. I hated that. And so years later, I found out that she had remarried and had married a dentist. And I was really good to hear that. And then I got a call. Well, I found out about his brother. And I got to meet his brother a couple of times. And I went to Tennessee where his brother lived and stayed with him. And so then he called me in 2018. It was in early March, and he said that he'd gotten a call from the other side of the family, Reg's wife's family, and they were going to have a ceremony for him. And it was going to be in, they were going to have some things in the town where he was from in Missouri. And there was going to be a regular Army ceremony at Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, which was about 70 miles away. And he wanted me to come and ride with him up there, which I was more than happy to do. Other than all of a sudden I'm going like, oh God, I got to let all these guys know that flew at him because they're going to want to be there too, you know? And if they're going to be there, we're going to all go there early. And he's going there, you know, he's not doing it that way. I want to be there with them. So I told him, I said, I'm sorry, but he's going to have to go without me. I will be there before he ever gets there. And so we ended up with about 20 guys there and wives and such. And one of the things that we did was we had a FaceTime session with his wife, and she was about to die. She had a Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that. And she was not very far from dying. So this is why they wanted to hold a memorial service before she died. And so we went to Farmington, Missouri, and we stayed there, and all of us got together. And then the Vietnam Veterans of America, I think it was, or one of the veterans organizations there, gave us open house to their facilities. They had a meeting area that we took over, where we put up all kind of memorabilia about Reg and the other guys in the crew. but primarily about Reg, and we had access to their bar and everything. They were nice. Food, and so on. It's harder than I thought it was going to be. On March the 22nd of 2018, I went to Jefferson Barracks. Everybody gathered around. I sent you a picture of Don West pointing at a picture that Reg Cleve had taken when he became an officer. And that was that day. They had a ceremony for him, a 21 gun salute. And the odd thing, when we drove up there was 2 Black Hawks way off in the distance, hovering about 500 feet. And I'm going like, what the hell's that all about? You know, why are 2 Black Hawks hovering out there, just hovering at 500 feet? And they were at least a quarter mile away or more, you know. And it was because they were going to do a flyover. Yeah, they did a flyover. And so we had that. And all of his in-laws were there. His 2 brothers were there. And then that was a Friday. I think that was a Friday. I don't know, it was a Thursday or Friday. Anyhow, we had some downtime, and then Saturday, the local people had a memorial for him, and there had been a memorial marker put up at this church, and they moved it to the county courthouse, and they put it by the old stairway entrance to the courthouse. And we had another memorial service for him. And damn if they didn't have the news helicopter come and do a flyover. Oh, that was a hard time. But the hardest part, after all that was over, we were in that veterans lounge and we were doing a FaceTime with his wife. And when it came my time, I didn't know what to say to her. They gave me the laptop. And I looked at her, and she looked at me. Then we both burst out crying. And they took the laptop away from me. So I never did get to talk to her. And so about 3 months later, she died.
Were you able to talk to her on the phone or anything before she passed away?
I never, ever spoke to her on the phone. I did speak to other family members, and they've relayed information back and forth, but I never directly spoke to her. She had the opportunity to call me if she wanted to. She never answered my letter. I'm glad. I don't think I could have dealt with it. Sorry, I got so emotional on this, but I've had this I had this problem solved for a long time now. I got to tell you while we've got time, if you don't mind, I started to write it all down. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to ask you, do you remember the day I came in wearing this?
Yes.
I remember that day too.
Yes.
You changed my life that day.
How did that?
And I got to thank you. You told me I wasn't FUBAR. You told me there was 2 things I needed to do. I needed to get help. And Dr. Ferdina had told me after I told her that you said that, she said I should, and I did. And the other thing you told me was I needed to see a guy named Dr. Bruce Kelly, and I needed to get into his writing group, and I did. And doing both of those 2 things have changed my life. And I'll sit right down here and I'm crying over what I just told you. I didn't expect to, but I am. But I'll be okay in a little while. It won't tear me up like it used to. It doesn't tear me up anymore. Once we had that reunion, we had all those guys together. We all got to say goodbye to him with his family members. I'm still in contact with a lot of those people. 2 of them were airline pilots. So you Thank you.
You're
So
very
I would like to say to any veteran, doesn't matter what combat you were in, what war, or even if it's like a friend of mine who was CIA, he was looking over his shoulder all the time. It wasn't just for a year, you know. Get help if you need help. Get help. If you get angry and you scream at people and you throw things and you get so aggravated in traffic, you do stupid things, get help. And there are plenty of places that you can join veterans writing groups. It's the best thing that I ever did as a veteran. Over all those years of wondering why was I like the way I was, it took me seeing a therapist, getting in group therapy, and number one, that writing group. Our group was known as Brothers and Sisters Like These.
Mm-hmm. And
you did that.
Thank you. I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you participated with that. And you wrote a poem about Reggie.
Yeah.
Yes. You have that poem that you can share with us.
I think I can pull it up here right quick. I don't have it right on the tip of my tongue, but I think I can get it.
Okay. And while you're getting that, can you tell us, I guess maybe we want to go through these photos real quick?
Yeah, we can.
Is Celeste pulling those up for you?
Okay, let me manage my screens here just a little bit so I can multitask.
That's fine. I'll let you have a minute.
Okay. Let me see if I can find this file right quick, because I think I got a Word version of it. I'm in Word. Open. Let's see here. Okay, this is Ode to Reginald. He was tall and good looking, a confident young man. He flew Hueys for the Army, a chopper pilot in Vietnam. Reginald David Clevey was his given name. It was from Farmington, Missouri that he came. He was a bright, friendly fellow, wise beyond his years. He was highly respected among all of his peers. He was a skilled pilot and a courageous one, too. He took a mission that another would not do. It was so sad that when his life he gave, it was to replace another. Reg was so brave. Now, how did this happen, you ask? It happened that Reg volunteered for the task. He climbed aboard his Huey and was ready to go. It would be his second time at that awful shit show, that combat offensive named Lamson 719. Reg had just 46 days left in Vietnam at the time. In his heart, he knew that he would not survive. He called me to talk and said his goodbyes. We stood on the flight line at the nose of his bird, with rotor blades swishing softly above. It was then that I heard he had a premonition that he would not survive, that this would be the last time I'd see him alive. A favor of me, he asked, was to write his wife if he was listed as MIA, but I knew he had lost his life. So I told him yes, I told him I would, but when it happened, I didn't think I could. Then I found a letter that he had left in my room. It was instructions for the awful task I had to assume. With my eyes full of tears, I wrote Karen the letter. I hated the task because I knew how it would upset her. Along with my letter, I enclosed his note to me so that she could read it, so that she could see, so that she could read it and could understand that my intentions were simply to follow his command. She and I came face to face after 47 years, and both of us immediately just burst into tears. She had moved on and lived a good life, but she never forgot that she was his wife. And I wrote this poem in memory of Reginald David Clevey, born August 2nd, 1947. KIA, March 22nd, 1971, Savannah Ket Province, Laos. Body never recovered. Volunteered to serve, lost in Laos. Memorial service held March 22nd, 2018. Never forget.
Thank you.
I hadn't read that in a while.
I know. And I guess lastly, would you share about your honor trip, your honor flight?
Oh boy. Brothers and sisters like these, a guy named Stephen Henderson. He's the force behind it with Ron Toller and Alan Percal, and all three of those are in different veterans organizations in some position. And so Stephen Henderson, me being a group of brothers and sisters like these, and I was helping read at different readings and things and attending classes, and he said, we're going to put you on an honor flight, and I'm going to be your guardian. And then to really make it even better, he had one of the original members of Brothers and Sisters Like These, David. There's three guys with the same last name, and I can't remember it. Anyhow, this guy wrote a poem called "Across the Sea," and it ended with with brothers like these. So our group got named because of that poem, Brothers Like These. And then it was changed to Brothers and Sisters Like. David Robinson is his name. He's a hillbilly. He's an admitted hillbilly. That's what his nickname was or is. And a wonderful guy, a wonderful writer, a wonderful reader. He was on my right, and Steve Henderson was on my left. They flew me up to. We went up to Maryland and rode buses down to D.C. And when I say rode buses, first of all, we flew up there and we had a guy in charge of us who's a judge, and he's judge of Veterans Treatment Court too, and he was in charge of our yeah. So we toured Washington, and we flew back, and the bus ride all around Washington, we had police escorts. We went 70, 80 miles an hour everywhere we were going except right in the city. A wonderful experience. I got to meet Jeff, and he's the guy that founded all of that. He came up and talked to me. I didn't know who he was. I asked him, was he a veteran? What did he do? He said he wasn't a veteran, but he tried to look out for veterans. Then I found out he's the guy that first founded, these veteran honor flights in Florida. Great guy. Lives here in the area. It was a great experience. I could have worn my other flight, my honor flight hat, but I decided to wear this one. I got this one at one of our company reunions in Ohio.
What was your favorite thing about the honor flight trip?
I'd say without a doubt, I'd already been to the wall. In fact, I'd been there. I think I went there. Did we go there twice or just once? I can't remember. I know I'd been there. We went there twice. That's what I thought. I'd already been to the wall twice. And so the highlight of my trip was sitting there with David Robinson and sitting there with Steve on that flight and on that bus. And Steve we got one place, he got me a wheelchair. I mean, whatever I needed, whatever I wanted, if I wanted a drink, he went and got it. He was my man Friday for a while, and those two guys were great. We went to the wall. It was raining. They wanted us to take a picture at the Lincoln Memorial. We got soaking wet.
Uh-huh.
Waiting on a politician to come out and have his picture taken with us. We waited half an hour in the rain for that. It would have been okay, but I'm not a fan of that politician. And I've done other things with him since then. I mean, he does a lot of good things. So yeah, it was going to the wall and riding with those two guys, and just there wasn't any one thing that stood out other than the experience of being with those two guys and going to all those places that we went to with them. Oh, and then the highlight. Celeste reminded me. Coming back was the highlight. No question about it. When I got off the airplane, they had a special deal for us to walk down. They didn't have just a regular ladder coming down off the airplane. We had to walk off the airplane. There was no getting on at the gate. You know what I'm saying? Or getting off at the gate. We had to get off outside, and we had to walk towards a building. And when I got out the door of the aircraft and I looked out there, I'm going like, what the hell's going on here? There was people lined up on both sides of this walkway from the aircraft all the way up to the building, and the building was full of people. And they were all welcoming us home. Welcome, well, I can't even say it. It was a big welcome home party. That's what it was. And my good friend and mushroom guru was there. And I didn't know, but they had notified Celeste what was going on. And so she's rounding up friends, to see them there. And there were kids from the local ROTC units and stuff were there. So they were saluting us the whole time we got off the plane. They didn't even break salute. Welcome home. That was quite an experience. Yeah, that I should never forget. That's why I have Celeste, to remind me of stuff like that. Yeah, that was quite an experience. It was emotional. This is emotional. Talking to you again. Are you still doing acupuncture?
Of course, every chance I get.
I knew it. Somebody's lucky. That's all I can say.
Thank you. So, I'll never quit doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
But tell me what you most want for other people to know about your military service.
I think it's good for anybody to be in the military, male or female or whatever. I don't care. I'm one of those I don't care persons. There's been times when I felt like that military service should be mandatory, but it shouldn't be, because there are a lot of people who should never be in the military. And those people that got drafted got weeded out in basic training, or they found something safe for them to do, or the worst situation, they became a grunt carrying a rifle and they were going to get killed. And that's the way it was. I like the fact that we have a volunteer army. There are thousands and thousands of men who will volunteer if they need to, or will accept the draft if they need to. I'm not worried about that. But I think everybody should do something in service to their country for a couple of years. Maybe it's just the Peace Corps or any kind of volunteer thing like that. Everyone should have that experience.
Also, we haven't talked about the highlight of your post-service years, and that is Celeste.
Oh, yeah. 41 years we've been married now. And I honestly don't think there's any way I'd be here if it wasn't for her. I was headed to some deep, dark places until she came along. And that didn't happen. And I'm glad that I was able to go through therapy so I can be a better partner for her, because I began to understand why I, had a lot of the behavior that I did. And I think I try to be a better person, particularly a better husband to her. She's been a completely forgiving and wonderful partner the whole time. She's sitting right over here beside me right now.
Hi, Celeste. Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, she's special,
She is.
no doubt about that. And we've done so much together. We like to do the same things. We camped out a lot. We spent a lot of time out on or around water. Um, we go to Michigan every chance we get. We go to the beach every chance we get. That hadn't been in a while. We've traveled and lived all over the United States. We've lived in Oklahoma. We lived in Louisiana. We lived in Raleigh. We lived in back now in my hometown for 13 years. So look out for my parents until they both died. Yeah. Baton Rouge. We left Raleigh where we met, went to Baton Rouge, then we went to Oklahoma City. 2 years in Baton Rouge, 12 years in Oklahoma City, 13 years back in Georgia, and now we've been here for 12 years, I guess. And this is it. The hurricane did not blow us off this mountain. We live in a Deltec home. They survive hurricanes. That's why we like it. They build them on the beach where they have hurricanes. I want to die right here on this mountain.
Okay. Hopefully not anytime too soon. Yeah. Well, y'all hang in there. Love you both. And I thank you for doing this interview. For
My pleasure.
Friends.
You need anything from me, you just holler.
Thank you. I appreciate you.